The rain washed the blood from the cobblestones, but it could never wash the ink from the crumpled paper in her trembling hands. A death warrant, bearing the seal of the most feared man in Boston. And as his armored Maybach slid to a halt, she knew he had arrived. The sky over Boston broke open, unleashing a torrential downpour that turned the historic North End into a blurred, grey nightmare. Nadia Romano stood beneath the flickering glow of a broken street lamp, her breath coming in ragged white plumes. She was soaked to the bone, her heavy wool coat clinging to her plus-size frame, weighing her down like a suit of armor that offered absolutely no protection. Water streamed down her cheeks, mingling with tears she refused to let fall completely, though a few escaped her fierce control. In her hand, clenched so tightly her knuckles were white, was a letter. The heavy parchment was already beginning to disintegrate at the edges from the rain, but the embossed wax seal at the top remained perfectly intact. A raven perched on a skull, the crest of the galley syndicate. Nadia was not a woman of the underworld. She was a forensic accountant, a woman who lived her life in spreadsheets, datasets, and quiet evenings in her modest apartment with a cup of tea and a good book. She was soft where the world was hard, possessing a generous, curvy figure that often made her feel invisible in a city obsessed with sharp edges and superficial perfection. But her mind was anything but soft. It was a steel trap, capable of finding the smallest inconsistencies in mountains of financial data. That hidden brilliance was exactly what had kept her alive for the past 3 hours, and it was exactly what had marked her for death. A low, rumbling hum cut through the sound of the driving rain. A convoy of 3 black, armored SUVs turned the corner of Hanover Street, moving with a predatory slowness. The vehicles parted the flooded streets like sharks moving through dark water. Nadia froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She recognized the vehicles. Everyone in Boston knew who rode in the center Maybach: Raffaele Galli, the undisputed boss of the New England Mafia. A man whose name was whispered in boardroom negotiations and back-alley dealings alike. He was a phantom to the police, a nightmare to his enemies, and according to the letter Nadia held in her hand, the man who had just ordered the execution of her entire family. Inside the quiet, climate-controlled cabin of the Maybach, Raffaele Galli stared out the tinted, bulletproof glass. His features were carved from cold marble, a handsome but severe face framed by dark hair and a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people made in a year. His dark eyes scanned the empty, rain-slicked streets with habitual paranoia. He was a man who trusted no one and controlled everything. Then he saw her. Raphael pressed a button on the intercom, his voice a low, gravelly command. "Stop the car." The driver instantly hit the brakes. The convoy halted in perfect synchronization. Raphael did not take his eyes off the figure standing under the street lamp. He knew her. God, did he know her. Nadia Romano. For 6 months, she had been his darkest, most tightly guarded secret. He owned Vanguard Financial, the firm where she worked, using it to wash millions in illicit cash. He had first noticed her on a routine inspection, sitting at her desk, her soft, beautiful face scrunched in concentration. In a world populated by plastic women and cutthroat men, Nadia was entirely real. He had become consumed by her. He had his men shadow her, ensuring her safety, watching her from afar. He was drawn to her curves, her warmth, and the quiet, unyielding strength he saw in her eyes when she stood up to her overbearing managers. I wanted to claim her, to wrap her in velvet and violence, and keep her hidden from the ugly world he ruled. But he had never approached her. She was pure, and he was drenched in blood, until tonight, seeing her standing in the freezing rain, shivering and terrified, ignited a primal, explosive rage in his chest. Someone had hurt what belonged to him. Raphael threw open the heavy door of the Maybach before his bodyguards could even react. He stepped out into the storm, ignoring the rain that instantly began to ruin his expensive suit. He walked toward her with slow, deliberate strides, an apex predator closing in on his chosen prey. Nadia watched him approach, terror paralyzing her limbs. Up close, Raphael Galli was even more intimidating than the rumors suggested. He was well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, radiating an aura of absolute authority and unspoken violence. She took a step back, her heel slipping on the wet cobblestones. Before she could fall, Raphael closed the distance in a flash, his large gloved hand shooting out to grip her waist. His hold was firm, anchoring her against the storm, and possessive in a way that sent a confusing jolt of heat straight to her core. "You should not be out in this weather, Nadia," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Her breath hitched. He knew her name. How did he know her name? She looked up into his dark, storm-grey eyes, mustering every ounce of her hidden resilience. She refused to cower. If she was going to die tonight, she would look her executioner in the eye. "Are you here to finish the job yourself?" she asked, her voice trembling, but her gaze defiant. She thrust the crumpled letter against his chest. "Or did you just come to watch?" Raphael frowned, his sharp jaw clenching as he looked down at the paper. He recognized his family crest. He recognized his own signature scrawled at the bottom, but he had never seen the document before in his life. I took the letter from her, his eyes scanning the smeared ink. It was a direct hit order. It detailed the assassination of Nadia Romano, followed by the systematic destruction of her sister and young nephew in Chicago, citing her discovery of stolen funds as the reason. Raphael felt a cold, murderous fury settle over his bones. Someone was forging his name. Someone was hunting his obsession. "Get in the car," he ordered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. Nadia hesitated, the rain plastering her dark hair to her cheeks. "I am not going anywhere with you." Raphael let out a sharp, dark laugh. The sound was devoid of humor. "You think I wrote this? If I wanted you dead, Nadia, you would have never seen the bullet. You are coming with me, because whoever actually wrote this is going to try again. And right now, I am the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave." Before she could protest further, he slid his arm around her shoulders, shielding her from the rain with his own body, and guided her into the warm, leather-scented sanctuary of the Maybach. He climbed in beside her and slammed the door, shutting out the roaring storm. The convoy immediately surged forward, disappearing into the Boston night. Inside the cabin, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Nadia huddled against the opposite door, wrapping her wet coat tighter around her generous curves. She was acutely aware of the massive, dangerous man sitting mere inches away. Raphael poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter in the center console and handed it to her. "Drink," he commanded softly. "It will stop the shivering." She took it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was burning hot despite the rain. She took a sip of the bourbon, letting the fiery liquid steady her nerves, then looked at him. "If you did not write the order, then who did?" she asked, her analytical mind automatically fighting through the fear, searching for logic. "That is what you are going to tell me," Raphael replied, leaning back against the leather seat, his eyes roving over her face, drinking in the sight of her in his car. "What did you find at Vanguard Financial, Nadia?" She swallowed hard. He knew where she worked. Of course he did. He probably owned it. "I was auditing the third quarter offshore accounts," she began, her voice gaining strength as she entered her element. Numbers were safe. Numbers did not lie. "I found a discrepancy in a series of shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. It was brilliant, really. A microscopic skimming operation, siphoning fractions of a % off the top of millions of dollars of transit funds. Most auditors would have missed it because the accounts always balanced at the end of the month." Raphael narrowed his eyes, genuinely impressed. The syndicate moved tens of millions through Vanguard. He employed the most ruthless accountants on the eastern seaboard, and none of them had caught a skimming operation. But this beautiful, unassuming woman had. "But you did not miss it," he prompted, a trace of dark pride bleeding into his tone. "No," Nadia said, sitting up a little straighter, her soft features hardening with resolve. "I traced the diverted funds. They were not bouncing through random servers. They were being funneled into a private equity firm here in Boston, Crane Holdings." Raphael went entirely still. The air in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. Tabitha Crane. The name tasted like poison on his tongue. Tabitha was a high society fixer, a ruthless power broker who had recently aligned herself with a rogue faction of the Irish mob operating out of South Boston. She was a woman who smiled over champagne while ordering men beaten to death with hammers in basement parking lots. Raphael and Tabitha had been engaged in a quiet, bloodless Cold War over the city's shipping ports for a year. "She was stealing from me," Raphael murmured, the pieces clicking together with lethal clarity. "And using my own laundering fronts to do it. And I found out," Nadia finished. "I printed the ledgers tonight after hours. But when I went to my apartment to pack a bag and run, the door was broken in. My place was destroyed. This letter was pinned to my mattress with a combat knife." She took a deep breath, her armor cracking just a fraction as the reality of her situation set in again. "The letter had your signature. I thought you were the one stealing. I thought you were cleaning house." "Tabitha forged my signature," Raphael explained, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "If my men found you dead with my crest on your body, they would assume I ordered it quietly. No one would investigate. Tabitha eliminates the only person who knows she is stealing from me, and she uses my own reputation to cover her tracks." Nadia looked down at her hands, the terror threatening to overwhelm her again. "She is going to kill my family. She knows where my sister lives. I have to go to the police." Raphael reached across the seat. He did not grab her. Instead, he gently placed his large, calloused hand over her trembling ones. The sheer gentleness of the gesture from a man known for tearing his enemies apart shattered the last of Nadia's composure. A single sob tore from her throat. "Look at me," Raphael commanded softly. Nadia lifted her tear-streaked face. "The police cannot protect you from Tabitha Crane," he said, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath stop. "But I can. You are under my protection now, Nadia. No one touches you. No one touches your family. If Tabitha wants a war, she will have one, and I will drown her in it." "Why?" Nadia whispered, searching his dark eyes. "Why are you helping me? I am a liability to you. I can prove your company is a money-laundering front. I could put you in prison." Raphael leaned closer, his scent of rain, gunpowder, and expensive cologne enveloping her. "Because, mi amor," he murmured, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. "I have been watching you for a very long time, and I do not let anyone touch what is mine." The Maybach turned off the highway, passing through a pair of massive wrought-iron gates that opened automatically into a sprawling, heavily wooded estate in Weston. The compound was a fortress, surrounded by high walls and patrolling guards holding assault rifles. It was terrifying, yet as Nadia sat beside the Mafia boss who had just declared war on her behalf, she realized it was the safest she had felt all night. The car pulled up to the steps of a massive stone mansion. Raphael stepped out first, extending a hand to her. Nadia looked at his hand. Taking it meant crossing a line she could never uncross. It meant stepping out of the light and into the shadows. But she also knew that the light offered no protection against monsters like Tabitha Crane. Only a bigger, darker monster could do that. Nadia placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a warm, unbreakable vice. Inside the mansion, the marble floors echoed with the sounds of chaos as Raphael immediately began barking orders to his lieutenants. Within minutes, a heavily armed extraction team was dispatched to Chicago to secure Nadia's sister and nephew. The efficiency was terrifying. Raphael turned to her, stripping off his wet suit jacket. His white dress shirt clung to the heavy muscle of his chest and arms. "We need to go over those ledgers," he said, his eyes burning with a dark, vengeful light. "If we are going to take Tabitha down, I need to know exactly how deep her rot goes in my organization. Can you do this?" Nadia stood in the center of the grand foyer, still dripping wet, a curvy, out-of-place civilian in a house of hardened killers. She felt the weight of their stares, the silent judgment of men who saw her as weak. She lifted her chin, her brilliant mind sharpening into a weapon. Tabitha Crane had underestimated her. She had thought Nadia was just a fat, lonely accountant who would quietly die in the dark. "Get me a laptop, a secure internet connection, and 3 pots of black coffee," Nadia said, her voice steady and commanding, ringing clearly through the quiet hall. "I am going to bleed her dry before you even fire a single bullet." Raphael stared at her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. The obsession he had harbored for months suddenly mutated into something much deeper, much darker, and infinitely more permanent. He had found a queen for his underworld, and heaven help anyone who tried to take her from him. The cavernous library of the Western estate smelled of old paper, gun oil, and the bitter bite of espresso. For 3 days, it had been Nadia Romano's war room. Spread across the massive mahogany table were dozens of laptops, encrypted hard drives, and towering stacks of printed financial ledgers. Outside the fortified walls, a brutal, silent war was tearing Boston apart. But inside this room, Nadia was orchestrating the slaughter with keystrokes instead of bullets. She sat in the center of the chaos, her hair tied in a messy bun, wearing an oversized cashmere sweater Raphael had given her. It draped over her generous curves, soft and luxurious. The men of the galley syndicate, hardened killers with scars and criminal records, had initially looked at her with thinly veiled skepticism. To them, she was a civilian, a soft, chubby accountant who had no business in their violent world. But as the hours turned into days, that skepticism had transformed into absolute, terrifying awe. Nadia was a predator in her own right. She moved through Tabitha Crane's financial networks with ruthless precision. She did not just find the stolen money. She weaponized it. She isolated Tabitha's hidden offshore accounts in Belize and Cyprus, accounts that funded the rogue Irish factions, keeping Tabitha in power. With a few brilliant algorithms and dummy corporations of her own, Nadia froze the assets, drained the liquidity, and redirected the funds straight into Raphael's untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. Raphael stood in the doorway, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching her. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of the street-level war he was managing, but his gaze was entirely fixed on Nadia. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, the soft, beautiful slope of her thighs beneath the edge of the sweater, the sheer, undeniable genius that radiated from her. He had built his empire on violence and fear, but Nadia was dismantling his greatest enemy with math and a Wi-Fi connection. He walked up behind her, his large frame casting a long shadow over the table. He rested one heavy, warm hand on her shoulder. The touch sent a familiar, electric jolt through Nadia. Over the past 3 days, the terrifying Mafia boss had shown her a tenderness she had never experienced in her life. He ensured she ate, ordered his chef to prepare her favorite meals, and personally stood guard while she slept on the leather sofa. "It is done," Nadia said, leaning back into his touch, allowing herself a moment of exhaustion. She stared at the glowing monitor. "I have severed her primary slush funds. Tabitha cannot pay the Irish faction. Without money, mercenaries do not fight. She is completely broke, Raphael. She is bleeding out, and she does not even know how to stop it." Raphael looked at the screen, then down at the woman who had just delivered a fatal blow to a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. His thumb traced the soft curve of her neck, feeling the rapid, nervous flutter of her pulse. "My men in Chicago just checked in," Raphael said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against her back. "Your sister and your nephew are secure. They are in a safe house in the mountains, surrounded by 20 of my best shooters. Tabitha's hitmen never even got close. They are safe, Nadia. I give you my word." The breath Nadia had been holding for 72 hours finally left her lungs in a shaky exhale. The analytical armor she had worn to survive the ordeal shattered, leaving only the terrified, exhausted woman underneath. Tears spilled over her lashes, hot and fast. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs of sheer relief. Before she could pull away, Raphael reached down and lifted her out of the chair as effortlessly as if she weighed nothing at all. He turned her around and pulled her against his chest, wrapping his massive arms around her soft, full figure. He buried his face in her dark hair, breathing in the scent of vanilla and espresso. "I have you," he murmured fiercely against her temple, his grip tightening. "I told you, no one touches what is mine. You are safe." Nadia clung to his broad shoulders, her fingers digging into the heavy fabric of his shirt. She knew she should be afraid of him. He was a monster to the rest of the world, a man who ordered deaths without blinking. But right now, held against the solid wall of his chest, she felt cherished. She had spent her entire life trying to shrink, trying to hide her curves, apologizing for taking up space in a world that demanded women be small and delicate. But Raphael looked at her as if she were a goddess. He worshipped her softness, and he feared her mind. "Why did you choose me?" she whispered, pulling back just enough to look into his storm-grey eyes. "You could have any woman in the world. Models, heiresses, women who belong in this life." Raphael cupped her face, his calloused thumbs wiping away her tears. He looked at her with an intensity that bordered on madness. "Plastic women break, Nadia. Heiresses bore me. I live in a world of lies, and you are the only real thing I have ever seen. You think your softness is a weakness, but it is the very thing that brings me to my knees. And your mind," he smiled, a dark, dangerous curve of his lips. "You are just as ruthless as I am. You just use a different weapon." He leaned down, closing the distance between them. The kiss was not gentle. It was a claiming, a desperate collision of heat and dark promises. Nadia let out a soft gasp as his mouth slanted over hers, demanding and possessive. Her hands moved up to grip his thick, dark hair, answering his raw hunger with a desperate, pent-up passion of her own. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely powerful, anchored by the devotion of the most dangerous man in the city. The heavy oak doors of the library slammed open, shattering the moment. Raphael broke the kiss, but kept Nadia securely behind him, his hand instantly reaching for the Glock tucked into his waistband. One of his lieutenants, a scarred man named Luca, stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. A submachine gun slung across his chest. "Boss," Luca said, his voice grim. "We have a problem." Tabitha figured out the money was routed here. She is desperate. She pooled whatever men she had left from the docks and breached the lower perimeter. They are coming up the driveway. It is a suicide mission, but they have heavy artillery. Raphael's eyes turned to cold, dead ice. "How many?" 30, maybe 40, Luca replied. "We have the numbers to repel them, but they are aiming for the house. They want the accountant." Raphael turned to Nadia. His expression was entirely calm, the terrifying calm of a predator about to feast. "We are moving you to the panic room. You will lock the door, and you will not open it until you hear my voice. Do you understand?" Nadia looked at the monitor on the desk. She could hear the distant popping sound of gunfire echoing from the front gates. The war had finally arrived at their doorstep. She looked back at Raphael, her jaw setting in a stubborn line. "No," Nadia said. Raphael blinked, entirely caught off guard. "Nadia, this is not a negotiation. I control the estate's internal server." "Raphael," she stated rapidly, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "When you gave me network access to trace the money, I routed the security grid through this terminal so I could monitor the perimeter. If I go to the panic room, you lose your eyes. I can lock the blast doors on the east wing. I can trap them in the courtyard. Let me help you kill her." Raphael stared at the woman he loved. She was trembling, terrified of the gunfire. Yet she was willingly stepping into the bloodiest part of his world to fight beside him. His chest swelled with a dark, violent pride. "Do it," he commanded. "Trap the rats." The Western estate turned into a slaughterhouse. Tabitha Crane, desperate and stripped of her empire, had played her final, suicidal card. Her mercenaries stormed the front courtyard, expecting to overwhelm the galley guards with sheer firepower. But they had not anticipated fighting an enemy who controlled the very environment around them. Sitting in the library, illuminated only by the harsh blue light of the monitors. Nadia was the ghost in the machine. Her fingers danced across the keys. She watched the thermal cameras on the grid. As a squad of Tabitha's men moved toward the East Wing entrance, Nadia hit a command. The heavy steel security shutters slammed down, trapping the men in the open corridor. Seconds later, Raphael and his men flanked the trapped squad, the suppressed gunfire echoing faintly through the thick walls of the mansion. Nadia breathed through her nose, forcing the panic down. She was sending men to their deaths. She was a forensic accountant, not a soldier. But every time she felt a spike of guilt, she remembered the letter. She remembered the combat, pinning her death warrant to her bed. She remembered the threat against her innocent nephew. Tabitha had chosen this war. Nadia was just finishing it. "West corridor is clear." Raphael's voice crackled over the radio sitting on the desk. "Where is she, Nadia?" "Yeah, where is Tabitha?" Nadia switched camera feeds, scanning the thermal signatures. She found a cluster of figures moving through the formal gardens toward the back terrace. One figure was hanging back, shielded by 4 heavily armed guards. "She is at the conservatory entrance," Nadia replied, pressing the transmitter button. 4 guards. "Raphael, she is trying to breach the glass." "I have her," Raphael said. The radio went dead. Nadia watched the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw Raphael's thermal signature, along with Luca and 2 others, move fluidly through the darkness of the mansion toward the conservatory. Out in the rain-swept gardens, the confrontation was brutal and swift. Tabitha Crane, wearing a sleek black trench coat, her blonde hair plastered to her skull, screamed orders at her remaining men. But they were outmatched. Raphael's men dispatched the guards with surgical precision. Tabitha backed away, drawing a small silver pistol, but before she could raise it, Raphael stepped out of the shadows. He did not shoot her. He simply walked forward, ignoring the gun pointed at his chest, grabbed her wrist, and twisted. A sickening snap echoed through the rain, and Tabitha shrieked, dropping the weapon. Raphael forced her to her knees on the wet stone patio. He looked down at the woman who had tried to destroy his syndicate and murder the woman he loved. "It is over, Tabitha," Raphael said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Tabitha spat blood onto the stones, looking up at him with a hateful, desperate sneer. "You rind everything for a fat, pathetic spreadsheet pusher. She does not belong in this world, Gally. She is weak. She will crack the second she sees what you really are." Raphael let out a low, dark chuckle. He pulled his sidearm, pressing the cold steel barrel against Tabitha's forehead. "You never understood the game, Tabitha," he said softly. "She is not weak. She just took everything you spent 10 years building, and she did it in 3 days while wearing my sweater. She is the queen of this city now. You are just the mess I have to clean up." He pulled the trigger. The sound was muffled by the rain. Inside the library, Nadia watched the thermal feed. She saw one of the glowing figures drop to the ground and stop moving. The remaining signatures stood still. The radio crackled on the desk. "It is done, amore mio," Raphael's voice came through, steady and calm. "The house is secure. I am coming up." Nadia leaned back in the chair, her hands shaking as she pushed the keyboard away. The adrenaline that had sustained her for hours suddenly vanished, leaving her hollow and exhausted. The war was over. She was alive. Her family was safe. But the world she had known before the rainstorm on Hanover Street was gone forever. 10 minutes later, the library doors opened. Raphael walked in. He was soaked from the rain, his shirt stained with blood, that did not belong to him. He looked like a demon dragged straight from the depths of hell. He stopped a few feet away from the desk, suddenly hesitant. He remembered Tabitha's final words. He knew the violence he carried. He was terrified that Nadia would look at him now, covered in blood and death, and finally see the monster he truly was. He was terrified she would run. Nadia stood up. She looked at his bruised knuckles, the blood on his shirt, and the exhausting darkness in his eyes. She did not scream. She did not flinch. She walked around the heavy mahogany desk, crossing the room until she was standing right in front of him. She reached up, her soft, warm hands resting against his chest, right over his beating heart. She did not care about the blood ruining her sweater. "Are you hurt?" she asked quietly. Raphael let out a ragged breath, his massive arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He buried his face in her neck, holding her as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "No," he whispered hoarsely, "I am fine." Nadia rested her head against his chest, closing her eyes. She was an accountant. She understood ledgers, balances, and debts. Raphael Gali had a ledger written in blood and violence, a darkness that could never be erased. But he had used that darkness to protect her. He had laid his empire at her feet and asked for nothing but her presence. She had found a man who would burn the world down to keep her warm, a man who saw her softness as a treasure and her mind as a weapon. She would never go back to being the invisible, lonely girl in a quiet apartment. "I am not leaving, Raphael," she said softly, wrapping her arms around his broad back. "This is my home now." Raphael lifted his head, his grey eyes burning with fierce, possessive triumph. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, sealing a pact that no law or rival could ever break. "Forever. Nadia," he promised, his voice echoing in the quiet, shadowed room. "You are mine. And heaven help anyone who ever forgets it." Thank you so much for reading this dark, thrilling Mafia romance. If you were captivated by Nadia's brilliance and Raphael's ruthless devotion, please hit that like button and share this story with your fellow romance readers. Drop a comment below, telling us your favorite moment between the Mafia boss and his brilliant queen. Did you love her hacking skills or his fierce protection? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping underworld tales, intense romance, and unforgettable characters.